Good evening.
Evening.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening, students. Thank you so much.
Evening, ma'am.
Thank you so much for joining us. Good evening, everybody. We will be starting at 5 o'clock on the dot. We've had to mute all of you to ensure that there is smooth progression during the program. So kindly ensure that you keep yourselves on mute throughout unless unmuted by the host. Thank you. Good evening to the students who have just been joining us. We shall begin at 5 o'clock. Thank you for joining us. Please ensure that you are on mute throughout the program unless unmuted by the host. If you have any queries, we will enable the chat during our Q&A session or a little before that. So please post your queries there. Thank you. Good evening to our students who have just been joining us. Thank you for joining us. We shall begin in about 2 minutes from now. Oh, it is 5 o'clock. We shall just wait for all the students in the waiting room to join us and then we'll begin. Kindly ensure that you fill in your attendance sheet, which will be posted in the chat box as soon as we enable it. It's a Google form, just like how you did in our previous session. Please ensure that you fill in your attendance. Thank you. So with your permission, can we begin the program?
Yes, please.
All right. Thank you. So good evening to all our sport qualifiers. I am your host Siobhan, and it's wonderful to be with all of you again for our second session. Welcome to the session 2 of the VSSF Sport Virtual Classroom. Before we proceed, we do have the house rules which we always follow. I hope you remember some of the rules that we had posted in your first session. So kindly ensure that you stay throughout the program because this session would last for about an hour and a half. Please ensure that your microphones and mobiles are on silent except while asking questions or when unmuted by the host. We request you, as always, to be active participants in the session, to listen, because some of these questions posed today could be asked in your spot final exam. This is a humble request from all of us. Please avoid or refrain from doodling on the screen or in the chat box because it is extremely disturbing for the other participants and for us as well. If found otherwise, we might have to restrict your participation from the classroom. We did have one session last class, and I know you're like extremely enthusiastic and interested, and you are extremely curious. So there are a lot of questions that keep coming in the chat box, but kindly ensure that your questions are related to our topic at hand for our resource speaker, right? And post your question only once because we are going through every question and we pick them out based on the relevance of the theme. All right. So if everybody is familiar with the housekeeping rules, I'd like to move forward to our topic for today, which is climate change. And we're emphasizing on polar frontiers because our keynote speaker for today, Mr. Rituraj Fukan, has been on an expedition to the polar frontiers. So all the questions that you have, you can feel free to ask him. He is an environmental writer, a TEDx speaker, an adventurer, and a naturalist based out of Assam. He is the founder of the Indigenous Peoples Climate Justice Forum, and as Chief Operating Officer for Walk for Water, the National Coordinator for Biodiversity, Climate Reality Project, and Secretary General of Green Guard Nature Organization, he facilitates awareness and action on the 3 Ws, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with: warming, water, and wildlife. He works with stakeholders from the grassroots communities in his native Assam to school and university students, civil society, and media for a positive social impact. There is one quote of his that I've sort of taken out, and I would like to read it out for you. So he believes that water is the local issue of global climate change for people and biodiversity. And he believes in making a personal commitment to solving the biggest environmental crisis to humanity. He has been on expeditions to Antarctica and the Arctic region thrice for a first-hand experience of the impacts of climate change on the fragile ecosystems of these regions. So it's an absolute honor to welcome you for our session today. I hand it over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ms. Shivan. It's wonderful for me to be interacting with all the students here. Thanks to everybody for attending this session, and I will quickly go on and share my screen. Just let me know if it is visible.
Yes, it is. Yeah, full screen mode. Thank you.
Thank you. So the topic for today that I have chosen to interact with you is connecting the 3 Ws: warming, water, and wildlife. Let me start with this beautiful photograph of our planet. This is known as the blue marble. This photograph, the blue marble, is perhaps the most reproduced photograph in human history. This was taken from exactly halfway between the Earth and the Moon during the last Apollo mission. And it has got a lot of relevance because it kind of marks the start of the modern environmental movement in the 1970s. As you all are aware, the Earth Day began in 1970. And 2 years later, we had the first World Environment Day. So the blue marble, it's so called because, of course, it shows the first, the full face of the Earth. This was the first photograph. Since then, we have had some more photographs, one of which even shows India, but this was the first. So let me begin with a weather report, as I have been doing in the past few months. And just last month, some of the highest temperatures in the southern hemisphere were recorded. We had a very record-breaking summer in 2021 across the northern hemisphere. But very recently, just last month, Australia reached 50.7 degrees Celsius. And then a day later, another record temperature was marked in Uruguay. So this has been blistering, really hot across the southern hemisphere during this winter. So what is happening in the northern hemisphere? Again, we have had some of the warmest 1st of January records across Europe as well as North America. In fact, in North America had a huge wide range of temperatures, almost 15, 16 degree differences within the continent. So all of these anomalies have been happening very consistently. If you look at these temperature anomalies across the last year, 2021, every month showed a lot of warmer record-breaking temperatures throughout the northern hemisphere as well as the southern hemisphere. So last year was an incredible year. Now, when you look up at the sky, it looks like the atmosphere is endless and vast. But the famous astronomer Carl Sagan actually compared the atmosphere to a layer of glycerin that is coated on a globe. You have those globes in your classroom, and then you see that it's laminated, right? There's a layer, a very thin layer. So our Earth's atmosphere relative to the size of the planet itself is very thin. It's just like that coat of varnish, and it has a lot of effect on the way we live. First of all, let's quickly look at what is the greenhouse effect. The solar radiation that comes in the form of light waves passes through the atmosphere. It reaches our planet. Most of this radiation is, of course, absorbed by our planet, and it keeps it nice and warm. Some energy is radiated back in the form of infrared waves, which is known as the greenhouse effect. But because of the accumulation of extra carbon dioxide and methane, we have additional heat being trapped within the atmosphere, and that makes the Earth warmer. And that is the problem. So where does that additional excess man-made warming pollution come from? And the quantum is huge. It's 152 million tons of pollution every 24 hours, global warming pollution. And it is all going into that very thin shell of our atmosphere. And it comes from all kinds of human activities. Of course, everybody knows about fossil fuels, about coal and oil, but there are other things like melting permafrost. There is all kinds of industrial processes, agriculture, land transport. All of it adds to this pollution of our atmosphere by earth warming gases. By far, the largest source of global warming pollution is the burning of fossil fuels. And that has really accelerated since the Industrial Revolution, of course, but since the 1950s, it has really started to go up. And in the last 40, 50 years, it has really mounted. And that has caused tremendous changes in the temperatures on this planet. If you look at the warmest records of temperatures on Earth, the 19 of the 20 hottest years have happened within this century, perhaps within the time you guys were born. And the most warmest years have been the last 7. Now, this is, of course, prepared in January, but now 2021 is right there within this. So you can say the last 8 years have been the warmest in recorded history. this was global surface temperatures across the northern hemisphere. Last year, we had really huge records in many countries. And India, of course, had 51 degrees Celsius a few years back, 5 years back. Thankfully, we haven't passed 50 since then in most parts. But what does it mean? It means that heat waves kill people across the country. There's a lot of water scarcity happening, and all this extra heat that is trapped by the earth actually goes into the ocean, and that causes these massive storms. This was Tuktai, which happened last year, but there have been so many, and who are suffering? This is the children, especially in Orissa, students who were young people who were struck by COVID, they were missing school at the same time this happened, and Amphan and this disaster are happening more and more often, and it's often the weaker sections, people who are below the poverty line, children and women who suffer the most. Now, these kind of extreme weather events, whether they are floods or extreme rainfall events, are happening now 4 times more often than 1980. India, of course, is one of the most affected by this climate change, and it is among the top 10 worst affected countries in 2019. The economic damage, in terms of economic damage, India ranks 7th. So what makes India so vulnerable? Because of 3 critical factors. Number 1, we are dependent on agriculture. All of you must know that India is mostly largely agriculture dependent country. Second, we have a large coastline, which makes us very vulnerable to storms, cyclones, as well as sea level rise. And third, high fossil fuel dependence. We are still transitioning. Most of our energy comes from fossil fuels, from coal and oil. And although India actually, in terms of performance, is doing pretty well compared to a lot of developing countries, during the COP26, the 16th climate change assessment was published, which and according to that, India was the only G20 country to be ranked among the top 10 performing countries in terms of climate action. We'll come to that later, but what are the changes that are already happening? Temperature is on the rise. We know that rainfall is decreasing. Overall, rainfall is becoming unpredictable. In some places, we are seeing intense rainfall events happening in a very short period of time. In the past, it used to be scattered. It used to be the rainfall is to come over a period of few months, which is useful for agriculture. But now it rains intensely and suddenly at one place, so that is causing a lot of problems. And then extreme weather events are becoming more common. Like your miss was saying, I always say that water is the local issue of climate change for people and biodiversity. In many ways, the climate system is disrupting the hydrological cycle as we know it. The same extra heat that actually evaporates more water, which causes more floods and storms, actually puts the moisture out from the soil. So it is also responsible for more droughts. One of the countries that faces extreme groundwater countries is India. And we are seeing that wetlands are drying up, rivers are running dry, and a lot of farmers are committing suicide, especially in drought-prone regions like Maharashtra. Over half the country faces extreme to highly extreme water stress. And this is a map which doesn't show the northeastern region as water stress, but as you learn later, my part, the Northeast, is also suffering from water stress and is projected to be one of the worst affected in the future. India is unfortunately, again, one of the countries which is over pumping the aquifers, the underground water sources. So a few years back, NITI Aayog, in fact, named the Indian water crisis as the worst ever in history. And look at the headlines: washing has become a privilege in some parts. Please don't come to Shimla. Locals were pleading to tourists. There have been other slogans in places. In some places in Rajasthan, people stopped celebrating Holi with water. So all these things did not happen before. India was never a water scarce country, but now slowly things are changing. Now, some of these figures are astounding, actually. In some parts of Tamil Nadu, 95% of wells have dried up. In North Gujarat, in some places, the water tables are falling 20 feet per year. So that is a grave pointer to the consequences in the future. Even this data-driven map of where the likely water wars are going to happen in the future actually named the Ganga Brahmaputra Valley, which currently is not water stressed. In fact, most of the states within the Ganga Brahmaputra area, like Assam, for example, where I live, we are known more for the floods than water scarcity. But the projections are that these are the areas where in the future we might be seeing water wars happening. That same data-driven study was again, proven by other studies, including this assessment of the of climate change in the Indian region published last year, which showed that the Hindu Kush Himalaya has already experienced 1.3-degree warming, and that is causing intense, accelerated melting of the glaciers, and then change in monsoon precipitation. So all of this, there are climate model projections that indicate that in the future we will see more drought-like conditions and water scarcity across these areas. Now, since the middle of the 20th century, India has already witnessed a rise in average temperature. This is the assessment made by the government of India last year. So it basically repeats many of the things that other studies have done in the past, including the Hindu Kush Himalaya assessment published in 2019. This actually looked at all the impacts of climate change from the Hindu Kush to the Himalaya, to the eastern Himalayas. This entire belt, which supports some of the world's most populated countries, like India and China, of course. And this Hindu Kush Himalaya are known as the third pole, or they're also known as the water towers of Asia, because so much fresh water is locked here. It has got more ice than any other place on Earth outside of the two polar regions. Now, a lot of impact on human beings is already talked about, is well studied, but what is happening with our biodiversity, with our wildlife, is something that is very less known, although these two headlines from India in the last few years kind of are an indicator of how biodiversity or how wildlife is affected within the jungles. Tigers kill elephants in Kerala, and then again, you have monkeys killing each other as well. A few years back, 2 years back actually, about 200 elephants died in Zimbabwe because of the prolonged drought. And last year, if you remember, about 6 giraffes were photographed dying because of water shortage, again in Africa. Asian elephants are very vulnerable. They are susceptible to heat, stress. They require a lot of water, about 200 liters every day, and a lot of food as well. So what happens when the precipitation changes? If it doesn't rain as it should be, or as the vegetation demands it to be, then the grasslands may disappear, and then elephants and other animals like the rhinos, they tend to migrate, and that causes again more problems, conflicts with people living surrounding areas. This entire vegetation change on Earth is going to be disastrous for biodiversity as well as for human being, because a lot of our food security is also dependent on this biodiversity. Now, almost 50% of all land-based species may be lost within this century. which is really sad because so much of life it's a wave of life, and so we are all dependent on each other. And if species are disappearing, we cannot, first of all, we cannot bring them back. When they're extinct, they're gone forever. And then so much of human well-being is dependent on biodiversity as well. Uh, we know that COVID-19 is just one of the diseases that is attributed to have jumped from wildlife to human beings. So many of these diseases that have emerged in the last few years are all zoonotic. They have been transmitted from animals to humans because we are destroying their space, and because of climate change, there has been a loss of habitat, bringing us into more contact with wild animals. There are a lot of other things connected with how climate change affects these wild species. I wrote a chapter on the biodiversity impacts of warming in this Amazon #1 bestseller book. So if you could get it in your library, you are most welcome to read it. Now, we have been looking at all the gloomy news, but I want to concentrate more on the solutions. What is the way forward? What can we do? Do we have the solutions? Apparently, yes. One is, of course, green energy. Some of you must have heard of renewable sources, a transition to renewable energies. But can we do it? Can we really make the change from using fossil fuels to renewable energy so that we can stop this destruction of our planet? 22 years back, somebody made these projections of how much wind capacity the world will achieve in the next 10 years. It was just 30 gigawatt. By 2019, we have actually exceeded that by over 22 times. So these are good news, and this is how a graph of global wind energy looks. It has been increasing exponentially. India is one of the countries which is also part of this green wind energy revolution that is happening. Similarly, if you look at the solar energy projections from around that time, they predicted 1% gigawatt growth per year, but in reality, that goal was exceeded several times over. In 2019, it was exceeded, the target was exceeded by 121 times. So how much potential does solar energy have? Now, this is astonishing because we get enough sunlight in 1 hour on the Earth to actually meet all the energy requirements of our planet for the entire year. The problem is to harness this energy. The problem is to have those proper battery storage to use this energy and distribute it where it is required. Can it be done? Of course, it can be done. All we need is research and development, more money being put into R&D activities in this domain. However, priorities of governments are different, and we are seeing people are, even private investors are more intent on having a race to space rather than investing in technologies that could be changing everything for the better for our planet. Now let's come to the Paris Agreement. The first ever agreement on climate change was achieved in the year 2015 at Paris. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, met for 21 years without reaching an agreement. But at COP21 at Paris, finally, we had an agreement. And that agreement said that every country will make some commitments called nationally determined commitments. And every 5 years, the countries will come back and declare new targets so that we can achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. The US rejoining the Paris Agreement actually helped. And then late last year in December, in November, we had COP27 at Glasgow. I was part of this event. I was an observer, and some of the photographs, yeah, we have a lot of young people were out on the streets marching. This was at a meeting addressed by Greta Thunberg. I had a lot of events of my own as well, and these were very vital negotiations. And the People's Plenary, which happened on the 11th of November, saw many of us walking out because we thought the governments, the main negotiators, were not showing enough urgency for climate action as they should be. The IPCC report that was published last year on August 9th, which is nicknamed code Red for Humanity, gave us very little time, just about 10 years, to ensure that we transition away from fossil fuels. But that urgency of action was not shown by world leaders, so we did a bit of walking out as well. But let's look at whether COP26 was actually successful. Before it began, we had 4 goals. Number 1, to secure global net zero by mid-century and keep 1.5 degrees within reach. The Glasgow Climate Pact, which was the outcome of COP26, barely kept that target within reach. Second, adapt to protect communities and natural habitats. One of the things here is that the United Nations, as well as all the allied international organizations, now agree that about 80% of the remaining natural places on Earth are either protected or managed by indigenous communities, indigenous people, and local communities. That means we have to ensure that these communities are given their due authority and power to ensure that these habitats, this biodiversity, are protected. So it's a global problem, but we have to look at local actions. And I think we are in the process of empowering these indigenous people around the world. And we made some progress during COP26 as well. Third was mobilize finance. Now, many of you know that the problem of greenhouse gas emissions was mostly caused by industrialized nations, and the impacts are now felt by developing countries, and the poor people who had no contribution to this global warming problem are suffering the most. So we need to mobilize finance to help these affected communities. However, very little progress was made. Hopefully, we'll see more such progress during COP27 later this year. A last target was to work together to deliver. I think that is one area we achieved good success, because for the first time, I think everybody agreed, all the countries agreed, that we need to actually come back with better targets to reduce emissions every year rather than every 5 years. So this year and next year, this year the COP27 will be held in Egypt, and next year COP28 will be held in the United Arab Emirates. And within these 2 years, we hope that all the countries of the world will come back with better plans and commitments to reduce their respective emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and we will be able to achieve net zero by 2050 or earlier, and also limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So what were some of the outcomes of COP26? And this was the first ever global commitment to phase down the use of coal. So we are going now, all the countries in the world are going to stop using coal slowly, or reduce it at least, and then phase out fossil fuel subsidies. In many countries, coal and other fuel prices are actually subsidized by the government. So there are plans to decrease that. And a lot of other financial agreements were reached, like doubling of financial support for adaptation and all that. There are other commitments, which is very interesting, and you should be all aware of this because it is going to affect everybody's future, especially the younger generations. Uh, we are going to switch over to zero emissions transport. We are going to end deforestation, and we are going to start reducing methane emissions, which is, I think all of these are very critical. So these were not actually part of the Glasgow Climate Pact, but these were agreements between countries outside of the official pact. Now, this is the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. I think he made a very profound statement a few years back. My generation has failed to respond properly to the dramatic challenge of climate change. This is deeply felt by young people. No wonder they are angry. And young people are leading the movement. Young people have always been at the forefront of the environmental movement. Let me highlight a few of the incredibly inspiring young people who has changed this world. Back in 1992, Savern Kalis Suzuki, who was only 12 years old, she actually silenced world leaders for 5 minutes at the first Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. And this is what she said. I'm going to read it out for you. You don't know how to fix the holes in our ozone layer. You do not know how to bring salmon back up a dead stream. You don't know how to bring back an animal now extinct. And you can't bring back forests that once grew where there is now desert. If you don't know how to fix it, please stop breaking it. I think this was very profound. Please go to YouTube if you have access to it whenever you can, and listen to her because it's available on YouTube, and listen to the complete speech. It was really, really inspirational, and it continues to inspire young people all over the world even now. Felix Finkbeiner, another very young and extremely influential young man who at the age of 9 started this group called Plant for the Planet. His aim was to plant 1 million trees. Right now, the Plant for the Planet group is now spread in all the countries of the world, and they have already planted more than 100 million trees. So you are never too young to make an impact. He was just 9 years old, just remember that. Now, our own India's 9-year-old star is Ridhima Pandey. She, in 2017, she filed a case against the government of India for climate inaction, not doing enough to stop climate change. And then she continues to lead the climate movement along with other young activists around the world. Now, of course, all of you know Greta Thunberg. She started to sit outside the Swedish parliament a few years back when she was just 16 years old. School strike for climate. That's what this placard says in Swedish. And she has inspired these massive youth-led movements around the world, which I think gives me a lot of hope, which gives a lot of us a great hope that we will definitely be able to stop catastrophic climate impacts with young people in leadership positions in the next few years. I would like to end with hope always, and with good news. And this is actually something very new. This is the hope sculpture that was put up by an artist at on the banks of the River Clyde, where COP26 took place in November. And the name of this statue itself is the Hope Sculpture. This is a young man who is a young person who is standing with outstretched hands, and it kind of symbolizes optimism about humanity's response to the climate crisis. So I'm going to end with this slide. Remember, many of us talk about saving the planet, but actually, it is not the planet we are trying to save. We are trying to save the human species. We are only trying to save ourselves. The planet existed long before human beings came evolved, and it is going to continue to be there even if humans disappear from the face of the planet. So we must realize that the urgency of climate action is for our own good. It's for saving the human race. It is for ensuring that biodiversity loss, climate change do not drive human beings to extinction. With that, I'll stop sharing my screen so that we can take questions. I think we will have a lot of things to discuss beyond this presentation. So thank you very much for being so patient.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And I like how you really sort of started with the climate change issues that we're facing in today's world over a period of time. And then you very nicely went into the brighter side, the less gloomy side, where you were focused on the solutions. It's important to be aware of the problems, to keep ourselves up to date with the facts. But what do we do after that? Some of us are stuck in the first phase. We're even denying that there's a problem. But for those who are aware that there is a problem, we need to move into the solution part and see what we can do. And I also like how you pointed out that hope is an important factor. If you feel like, okay, the planet it's going to end and we're all going to die someday and there's no scope, then nobody's going to want to do anything anyway, even if they know it is inevitable. And at the ending, the quote was very relevant, right? Our planet Earth, our Mother Earth knows how to take care of herself. What we're more concerned about is how to save our own skin. So thank you so much. It was a wonderful session. We do have, as you can see, the chat. For me, there are over 100 messages because I haven't started reading the latest questions. But I have noted questions from earlier, which I will quickly read out first, and then we move into the other questions. Just give me a moment, please. So our first question is from Raghav. Raghav, if you can kindly unmute your mic and pose your question.
Are these questions from the chat?
Yes, there are questions from the chat. All of these questions are from the chat.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Raghav.
So my question is, how does reducing meat consumption contribute to climate change?
How does reducing meat consumption contribute to climate change? Yeah, of course, using only what you need and moving away from the wasteful consumer-driven ways of living that we have become accustomed to will be less stressful on our resources, will consume less energy, and will have a very positive impact on climate change. As you know, a lot of things are bought and thrown away. A lot of food is wasted. So all that wasteful expenditure that we talk of is actually a huge expense on the energy budget of the planet. It is not just expenditure in our pockets, but it eats away at whatever energy budget we need. When you are buying food, you must remember that it takes energy to produce that food. It takes energy to process that food, package it, and bring it to you. So if you waste it or if you buy more than you need, then it is wasteful expenditure in terms of not just money, but in terms of energy as well. So reducing your need or limiting what you buy, your expenditure to only what you need, I think will have a massive positive impact on emissions. So that is something that everybody's aiming at now. There are movements like minimalistic movement. There are in Europe, for example, many many young people refuse to fly because of the huge impact flying has on climate change. So by not flying, by choosing to use the train, they are directly using less energy. So that, I think, is a good example in answer to your question.
Thank you, sir. I think it's important, like you said, when we focus on changing our diet or sort of becoming vegan or vegetarian, we focus on only the short-term repercussions of it, but we don't think of it in terms of, like you said, the amount of energy that is expelled in catering to our need. And that is the problem, right? If it is in a small scale, then we're not sort of affecting the ecosystem as a whole. But when it comes to consumerism, that's where it sort of has like a triple effect, and it affects different spheres in the environment, ultimately leading to climate change. All right, we'll move on to our next question. This question, there are two students who have asked the same question, so I've grouped it together. Aradhana M, would you please unmute your mic and pose your question? Aradhana M.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, please.
What are the key polar ecosystem process that will be first responded to climate forcing, sir?
Well, number one is, of course, the loss of albedo. As the white snow or ice cover is lost and it is replaced by the dark sea waters, the amount of sunlight that is reflected will change. So the oceans will absorb more heat, more sunlight, whereas the white ice actually reflects, which is known as the albedo. But that is one of the positive feedback that is seen in the polar regions. And there are others like, when you lose the ice cover, then permafrost is exposed. And then below the permafrost, you have methane, which is many times, about 30 times more powerful than carbon dioxide in trapping heat. So all that is affecting the polar regions much more than the rest of the planet. Therefore, the polar regions, especially the Arctic, is warming at least 3 times as fast as the rest of the planet.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Aradhana, for that question as well. Our next question is from Grace Matthews. This has a little to do with the North Pole. Grace
Yes.
Matthews, yes, kindly
Yes, ma'am.
pose your question.
Sir, is there a hollow hole from the North Pole unto the South Pole, and have we explored it?
I'm not aware of any hollow. You mean a tunnel from the North Pole to the South Pole? Is that what you asked? Sorry, I could not get your question, Grace.
I think I'm not sure if you read it, but I have come across this.
Okay.
There's the theory of the Earth being hollow.
Yes.
It's called the hollow. Yes, is that what you were talking about, Grace? Because I've read it a long
Yes,
time back,
ma'am.
and okay. So I will quickly. I mean, it is it's hypothesized. There's
Yeah,
no.
I don't think the science supports that hypothesis. Actually, we do not believe that there is any hollow connection or a tunnel from the North Pole to the South Pole. The planet is solid. It's we do not have a unless you talk about the connection between the magnetic fields. So there is really no hollow hole then.
Thank
This
you, sir.
theory, thank you, Grace. This theory says that the Earth is hollow and there is a continent beyond Antarctica. And there was an explorer, Admiral Byron, or something of that sort. I can't recall the exact name, but he sort of claimed to have explored the hollow Earth and beyond Antarctica, and he found another continent, if I may say so. But again, it's all hypothesis. There's no scientific proof for any of that. Moving on to our next question. It is from a lot of students. I've combined this question. It is about your experience in the polls.
Okay.
Yes, a lot of students. I'm not calling out your names. It's a general question for most of the students.
Okay, let me share a few anecdotes, right? Of course, one of the most memorable things from both the polar regions is to see the auroras, the aurora australis at Antarctica and the aurora borealis, or the northern lights in the Arctic. These phenomena are incredible. You know, these only happen in the polar regions. You can look up the science why it happens. And my first experience of climate impacts, the first time I realized that what human beings are doing to the planet could really, really affect the future of human beings through sea level rise and many other things, was to actually stand on the ship at Antarctica and look at remains of the Larsen B ice shelf in 2013, 11 years after the ice shelf actually broke away. Uh, when it started to crack in 2002, scientists, geologists believed that something that was so stable for a long, long time, maybe 20,000 or more years, would take a long time to actually crack and break away. But when the first cracks appeared, within 3 or 4 weeks, the shelf had actually collapsed. And to see the remains of the Larsen B ice shelf 11 years later, those huge tabular icebergs were floating in an area called the Antarctic Sound. And that was really a moment of enlightenment for me. I thought that it would definitely affect sea level rise because those ice shelves actually protect the ice sheets from collapsing. And if we start losing the ice sheets that are on the landmass, it will add to the sea level rise. Although the ice shelves do not themselves contribute to sea level rise. So I think that was one of the first lessons. Second, I expected to see penguins, but I never expected to see the bones of whales lying around the Antarctic continent. So there was this huge bones scattered on the beaches of Antarctica, and I learned that those were from a time when electricity was not invented, and human beings, used to go there to hunt whales because the blubber or the fat of the whales was used to burn lamps in some countries. Uh, of course, the invention of the electric bulb made that unviable. So people stopped going there and killing penguins and seals and whales. But to see those bones, it's a reminder of the fact that how destructive we are as a species. Even the most remote places on Earth are not saved from our destructive impacts. And thirdly, maybe I should share something from the Arctic. Okay, on one expedition, yesterday I was telling the students that I consider the polar bear to be very symbolic of the wild. It's for me, it's the most wild and incredible animal on the planet. In 2015, I landed in a place called Churchill up in the Canadian Arctic, and there was a polar bear jail there. That was the only, I think, bear jail in the world where polar bears which keep entering the town because of in search of food, they are caught and put in that jail. So that kind of symbolizes the domination of nature by human beings to me. The second incident from the Arctic that I would like to share was what I talked about yesterday. That was the Global Seed Vault, a structure that was built by human beings to protect our food grains for the future, to ensure that we have enough seeds in case of any natural or man-made calamity that wipes out, our food sources or or causes a lot of changes in the weather. So future generations will have a place where the seeds of different food crops are stored. But just a few years after the so-called, super uh, efficient structure which will protect these seeds forever, uh, just after a few years after it was built, there were some avalanches and there were floods, and uh, parts of it was destroyed. So when I saw that myself some years back, it kind of gave me a brutal reminder that nature is very powerful and we are nothing compared, to the forces of nature. So whatever we do to protect ourselves would be insufficient uh, if we do not respect nature, if we do not recognize that we are actually powerless in front of nature. We must respect that. We must understand that the earth is one, and we cannot try to dominate every species. We cannot try to uh, keep destroying, keep using the oceans, the atmosphere as a dustbin for our waste products. We have to start respecting nature.
Thank you for sharing those experiences. We did discuss some of them yesterday. It's interesting to note how on one side we're trying to construct the seed vault so that in case there is a catastrophe or the end of times, and then we can sort of replant all of it and sort of give birth to life. And on the other hand, we're throwing polar bears in jail.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, it's embarrassing to even say that we humans can stoop to such low levels. This reminds me of this a common cartoon that I've seen where it says, a poster is nailed on a tree and it says "Save trees."
Yeah.
It's the irony of the situation. But thank you for sharing, your experience. I think only once you sort of really go there and explore and see how disheartening it is, can we really understand the repercussions of our actions to a large extent. But obviously, all of us will not be given the opportunity to go and explore, which is why we need to sort of be more aware and try and help and do all we can to save the planet from this stage itself. Moving on to our next question. Our next question is from Om. Om, can you kindly unmute your mic? Om Sharma. Otherwise, I will have to move on to the next question. Okay, we will move on to our next question. A lot of the questions have been repeated. Samriddhi, could you kindly unmute yourself? Okay, Samriddhi, Om Sharma, we'll move on to the next. But I would, yes, I think somebody is unmuted.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, please go ahead, Samriddhi.
Yes, ma'am. This is Samriddhi. Ma'am, I was asking that I realized with the help of distillation process, we can also make seawater drinkable water that clean. So why can we not? Why are we not being able to do that, or why are we not doing that?
First of all, I think we have not reached the stage where that is necessary yet. Even cities like Cape Town, which was facing the so-called D-Day or Zero Day a few years back, were able to start saving water and recharge their freshwater sources. But yeah, that technology is still been worked upon. It is expensive now. I think a lot of research and development is going on, and in the future, some parts or some countries might even resort to doing that for water security.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Samriti. And so our next question is from Yatharth. Yatharth, can you kindly unmute your mic and pose your question? Diya Patel, because both of you have asked the same question, Yatharth or Diya Patel. All right, I will just pose the question. The question is, will a rapidly shrinking cryosphere tip polar ecosystems into new states?
It could. The science is still evolving, but definitely uh, we do not really want to even visualize what would happen if all the ice were lost. So hopefully the world will be able to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and we will not face such a consequence. Many of the things that are now happening were not projected to happen for a long, long time, but the science is evolving very fast, and we are reaching different tipping points. We are seeing regime changes across the Arctic, which are our understanding of these changes are changing almost every year. So really, we do not want to visualize that yet. I don't think we need to look at such alarming, scenarios.
All right, thank you. Yes, we could be a little more realistic and focus with what we know at hand and try and do the best with that to start off with. Our next question is a very interesting question. It is from, just give me a minute, please. Tejas, Tejas, I don't have your full name because the rest of the part is your device. So kindly unmute your mic.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, thank you, Tejas.
Yes, sir, my name is Tejas. Sir, I wanted to know some more examples on any forest saving program which helps in reviving the forest or the animals.
One of the areas that people are working on, one of the projects that is being replicated on a global scale, is known as rewilding. Uh, so rewilding not only means restoring an ecosystem or a forest, but also introducing species that have been um, lost in the recent past, or have become locally extinct, so that they have a positive ecosystem impact. The best example, or perhaps the most well-known example of rewilding, was the reintroduction of wolves into the Yellowstone National Park. And there's a very good video on that. If you Google wolves of Yellowstone National Park, you'll see how the environment was positively affected by the introduction of the species. So animals have a lot of effect on the environment. Similarly, the whales in the ocean, the recovery of the whales after hunting was regulated has had a huge positive impact on climate regulation. Again, there are videos who could talk about this trophic cascade. The trophic cascade, will take a long time to uh, explain or understand, but maybe this is something that you might want to look up, because these are really, really interesting. And it is not just on land. A lot of rewilding is happening in the oceans too, where we are trying to bring back planktons. We are trying to use seaweed. There's something called oceanic permaculture that is now being practiced, so that marine species are recovered. Scientists are trying to bring back coral reefs. So all this is part of that rewilding and reforesting that we are talking about.
And sir, I also had one more doubt. These now the microplastics which are there in the ocean are
Yeah.
harming the ocean animals and the marine life. So, are there any ways you can reduce the microplastics?
Yes, we not reduce, we must stop using the microbeads. You will be surprised that where all you have microbeads, they are there in some toothpastes, they are there in moisturizing and cleansing creams that everybody is using these days. So these have to be banned. In some countries have already banned these microbeads. Unfortunately, uh, these have actually made their way all around the world. They have been found in the body parts of even human beings. They are found in different kinds of food, in water, and even in the most remote places on earth. So the only way uh, for us is to stop consuming them, and the government to stop producing them.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I think I did read sometime back that India was planning on banning because a lot of face washes had microbeads in them
Yeah.
for exfoliating properties, but then they realized how harmful it is. Our last question, but before we move on to our last question, a lot of students have been wanting the name of this book that you wrote the chapter on, which you had projected earlier.
Yeah, it's the book is known as Climate Abundant.
Climate Abundant. All right. I will be typing it in the chat box as well, because that's a question that keep coming up. You ended your talk with talking about hope. So this question is from Shama Shankar. Shama Shankar, can you kindly unmute your mic and pose your question? It's an interesting take on climate change.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes. Yes. So my question is, how can we use climate change on our advantage?
Oh, great question. Very interesting question. Well, first of all, I think climate change gives us an opportunity to reflect on what we are doing to our planet. We are using the environment, we are using nature as a trash can. Definitely, climate change is a warning, is a manifestation of everything that human beings are doing wrongly. It is an opportunity for us to change our ways. We have to stop trashing the environment around us. Uh, we have to go away from wasteful consumeristic societies, which makes the rich richer and the poor poorer. So I think it is a huge call for human beings to reflect on our civilization, our priorities as a whole, and ensure that we have a better world in the future where everybody, irrespective of race or status or place of birth, uh, gets the same opportunities and has uh, uh, equal or similar lifestyle and access to necessities of life. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you, Sham, for that question. I really like the question. It was very interesting because he's looking at it from a different perspective. Okay, now we do have climate change is happening. What can we learn, or what is the advantage, or how can we use it to save our planet? On that note, thank you so much for joining us today, sir. It was absolute a delight to have you and share all your experiences with us. And we hope that we can do better to save ourselves, and the planet will definitely take care of itself.
Thank you for having me here, and I'd just like to call out to all the youngsters watching this. Our hope, like the UN Secretary General said, I also believe that we have a very good future ahead of us. The questions reflect your knowledge, your understanding, your sensitivity towards our planet, and definitely, I would say the world will be in better hands with you guys. Taking care of the planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Students, kindly stay back because I would like to let you know about your upcoming session. Gayatri, kindly let me know if my screen is visible.
Yes, yeah, it's very much visible.
All right, thank you. Yes, so please let us know how you liked this program. You can like, share, comment, and follow us on our Facebook page. You can review us on Google as well. I know a lot of you have been asking questions regarding the recording. If you log on to our website, you will enter your spot ID, password, and then you will have access to the recording. So please ensure that you log on to the website, and you will have access to all the recordings in case you have missed any. But we would really like you to join us live so that you can interact and post your questions. Your next session is on the 18th of February between 5 to 6 p.m. And your topic for your next session is atomic energy. And our resource person is Dr. S.K. Malhotra, who is a senior scientist, Department of Atomic Energy. I'm sure this will be an extremely enriching session. So please do join us on the 18th of February at 5 p.m. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a good evening. I'll see you soon.